This is a tale about Judas, and it's called 11 Men. Enjoy. Tuesday. Wind and rocks. Judas was looking at the smirk of moon rising over the desert without returning the smile. He was shivering from the cold, but he couldn't sleep. And back in the cave, the rhythmic snoring of his brothers was driving him insane. He didn't like to admit it, but lately things weren't as right as they had been in the past. Things had changed, and he couldn't deal with it. He constantly had this suffocating, sinking feeling in his chest, taking away his peace and his sleep. Exploring the night? The question caught him off guard, but Judas didn't winch. He knew that calm and smooth voice. It's more the night exploring me, Peter. Thoughts have a different way of inhabiting the mind after the sun sets. Peter approached him, wrapped in an old sheepskin. In the pale light, with his long hair and beard loose in the wind, he looked like an apparition. The night is deceptive. Men who think under the moon do it at their own detriment, Peter replied. Judas stood still, looking at the rocky expanse in front of them. The desert was vast and terrifying, but as the days were going by, he felt a growing desire to walk through it and disappear. The moon, he said, has nothing to do with my concerns, and you know it. I thought your concern had been resolved, Peter said. Me too, but I was wrong. You know you can speak your mind with me. Judas nodded, looking at the dark horizon. He knew he could speak his mind to Peter, but at that moment he was having trouble speaking his mind to himself. We should leave Jerusalem, he finally said. Peter hesitated. Judas glanced at him. It was unusual for his brother not having a quick answer at the ready. Leave? Peter asked. Yes, leave. We should go back to the countryside, where people listen to us and no one spies from temples and palaces. Peter swept the desert with a hard gaze. I told you before, Judas. Things have evolved. This isn't about teaching a few shepherds anymore. This is about change. Change what, Peter? The world. The world? Yes, the world. Judas took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. I rather care for the people, he said. But this is for the people, Judas. And people are ready. They are on our side. They will march with us over the temples, over the palaces, over everything. You're talking about war. I'm talking about hope. We give hope to these people. Should we turn our backs and abandon them? No, I'm not saying we should abandon anyone. But why rush it? Why should we climb the face of the mountain instead of searching for a safe path? Because mountains can wait. Change can't. Judas shook his head. The streets are talking, Peter, and the air is getting thinner. We make too much noise. Those in charge are running out of patience. Do you think the people will stand at our side when they'll come for us? It's too soon. If we pull back now, we can buy the time we need to do things right. Revolutions don't happen in silence, Judas. Still water goes nowhere. It stagnates and rots. We need to run like a torrent and break in the levees. If we leave now, our credibility will disappear, and so will the people. Then what would stop those in charge to crush us? Judas shrugged. Maybe Peter was right. Maybe it was time for a frontal approach, and he was just being too cautious. He was often too cautious, too mistrustful. The master wasn't like that. Peter wasn't like that either. There was a lot of the master in Peter. Charismatic, always surrounded by people, outstanding speaker, always ready to put his hopes in someone else's hand. Although, in time, Judas had come to think that Peter's faith in people had more to do with his innate talent for manipulating anyone to his own will, rather than the selfless trust the master loved to spread. Peter got closer, putting his hands over Judas' shoulders. "The top of the mountain is right there, brother. It's within our reach. I have arranged a meeting with the emissaries from all the groups that supports the cause, all of them, from shepherds to Roman officials." A meeting? The news took Judas by surprise. When? Where? "Tomorrow, near the temple." The temple? Do you really want to plan a revolt under Caiaphas' windows? We were just talking about caution. What? "Calm down, my brother," Peter interrupted him. "A messenger will meet the emissaries and guide them out of the city in secret. The master and the rest of us will wait at the Garden of Gethsemane, perfectly safe. The path to Gethsemane is flat and bare. No spies will be able to follow unnoticed." Judas pressed his lips in a thin line. "Why didn't I know about this? Only me and the master knew. For safety. You should have told me. It's dangerous." "Everything is going to be fine, Judas. I promise." Judas stared at his brother for a long time, listening to the howling wind whipping the desert. "I hope you're right," he said eventually. "Who will be the messenger?" "We'll draw at dawn. Then I'll do it." "You?" "No, Judas, it cannot be decided like this. I just did. But we agreed to let the chance decide." "I didn't agree to anything." Judas glared at Peter, wondering for how long he had been preparing this meeting behind his back. "Be reasonable, brother. Chance is the will of God. Would you put yourself in his place?" "Don't be blasphemous just to prove a point," Judas said. "My faith is the will of God, and my faith says I'll be the messenger." Judas turned around to leave, but Peter held his arm. "All right. Fine. You'll be the messenger." Judas shook his arm free from Peter's grip. "I don't want to be kept in the dark like this anymore," he said. "Secrets are poisons for the soul. Some secrets save many souls, brother. I do what I have to do for the cause." "May God protect you, Peter," said Judas, walking away. "May he protect us all." Peter smiled, and he took Judas' place as a silent watcher over the desert. Wednesday. As the merciless sun was beating over his head, and his sandals kept filling with sharp gravel, Judas started regretting his decision of being the messenger. He had led the emissaries through the city and outside the walls, keeping a small group out of sight. Now he was guiding them toward the olive trees of Gethsemane. He wiped the sweat from his eyes and looked toward Jerusalem, searching for creeping shadows on their tail. But the road was clear. Only the 6 emissaries were following him. Quiet fellas with hard faces and black eyes like open wells. None of them had said a word. Judas still didn't know how Peter had managed to arrange that meeting, but bruised ego aside, he was starting to feel very glad he did. If everything went in the right direction, these people could really turn things around for the cause. With the support of all 6 groups, maybe there really was a chance of changing the world. Judas had spent a lot of time thinking about their last conversation. And maybe he shouldn't have been so hard with Peter. Maybe his brother was right. Maybe this was the time to change everything, and even if it wasn't, maybe it was worth trying anyway. Otherwise, what was the point of it all? Finally, the first trees. Beads of sweat kept pouring down his forehead and the sleeves of his tunic were soaked in the futile attempt to keep his eyes dry. He led the group toward the usual spot in the garden. His brothers were there. The master was standing among them and welcomed him with open arms. The heat had left Judas drained. He hugged and kissed his mentor, almost passing out in his arms. But the smile he got back was worth every effort. Meanwhile, the emissaries had gathered all around to pay homage to the man that was going to change the world with them. It was a glorious moment. And for the first time in months, Judas felt relieved. Things were moving, and they were moving in the right direction. Peter, as usual, was right. He sat down, nearly collapsing. The sleep loss and all the stress were catching up on him. He could barely keep his eyes open, and his sight was playing tricks on him. Were the emissaries carrying swords? He was still trying to put the scene in focus when he felt a terrible pain biting his skull from behind. Then he saw nothing at all. The sky was beautiful and full of stars. Rocks and dirt under his fingers. Taste of blood in his mouth. He was laying on the ground, and it took a very long moment of confusion to remember why. To remember the emissaries, the master, the ambush. When Judas pulled himself up, the pain almost broke him. But he held strong. He couldn't afford to lay down, not without knowing what had happened. The world was spinning hard around him, and his hair was a lump of dried blood. He fell 3 times before managing to get on his feet, supporting himself with a deadwood branch. No one was around. They must have thought he was dead, but against all odds, Judas was still breathing. The first thing to do was to get back to the cave. If any of his brothers had managed to escape, that was where he would have found them. He spent the whole night walking. The pain around his head was so intense that he couldn't even define it anymore. So he just resolved to ignore it. He was simply refusing to die before being sure the master and his brothers were safe. And so far, it had worked pretty good. A new sun was rising above the horizon when he finally reached the cave, but no one was there. The fear that up to that moment had been brooding under the surface became terror. He had lost his master, he had lost his brothers, and he was feeling lost himself. Judas closed his eyes, joined his hands, and prayed. He let go of his doubts, his rancor, and his regrets. He cleansed himself of all the thoughts and the fears that were clogging his mind, and focused only on the faint flame of hope he could still feel in the deepest recesses of his soul, the flame of his faith, the only place where he could find an answer. When Judas opened his eyes again, that little flame was a burning fire, and his determination was absolute. He went to the bottom of the cave, moved a large rock on the side, and picked up a bundle of cloth hidden underneath. Then he walked outside and turned toward Jerusalem. There was only one place he could go to get his answers. Thursday. Caiaphas' palace had a stone floor with a beautiful mosaic depicting a giant snake with a swollen belly wrapped around a bare apple tree. But Judas wasn't in the position of enjoying the craftsmanship. He'd been kneeling on that floor for quite some time, and his legs were hurting almost as much as his head. "I wonder," said Caiaphas, "why one of the Nazarene stock thought that knocking at my door could have been a safe initiative." He was taking cautious steps around Judas, like he was dodging a massive pile of shit. "Your Excellency, The guard on his right kicked him in the stomach, sending him face down on the floor. He wasn't allowed to talk. This morning, Caiaphas continued with nonchalance, I had a vision, a call. I saw that today God was going to test my faith. That is why I have given you the grace of my presence. So you better choose your words wisely, because they will decide your fate. Judas coughed and composed himself without daring to stand. He carefully pushed along the bundle of cloth. Caiaphas pointed at the bundle, and the man, dressed in priestly robes, crawled toward it, rummaging greedily. Metal was tinkling inside. 30 silver pieces, Your Excellency. The high priest frowned. I urge you to give me a sign you're part of my heavenly vision, and all you have is a dirty rag with 30 miserable silver pieces? This is blasphemy. It's ransom, Your Excellency, Judas croaked out. For my master, Your Excellency. I know he's detained. Caiaphas looked at the 30 silver pieces, stroking his oiled beard with his long, bony fingers. He had a faint, enigmatic smile. I'm not the one detaining your master, he said, and even if I decided his life was worth your miserable stack of silver, that would be nothing I could do to give him back to you. Judas thought hard about what to say next because Caiaphas was lying. He was Jerusalem's grand puppeteer. If he wasn't pulling strings, it was only because he didn't want to, not because he couldn't. Your Reverend Excellency, imperial authorities and Herodes' court won't grant me a hearing. If only you could... Caiaphas nodded at the guard, and Judas got silenced with another kick. Unfortunately, my dear friend, your master is a dangerous madman and a fool. He invades my temple. He stirs up the crowds against the true faith and defiles all authorities. Interceding in his favor would be like holding out my hand to a poisonous snake. The guards picked Judas up like a soggy rag, and Caiaphas looked at him with a sinister light gleaming in his eyes. Do you know what's the only good thing about Roman authority? He asked to Judas. The great care they put in dispatching troublemakers like your master. He smiled. And I have no intention to interfere with their efficiency. Goodbye, lost sheep. Judas got hauled outside and thrown in the street. He saw the ground getting closer and closer before plummeting back into darkness. The sleep of unconsciousness is a deep and dark pit from which it's hard to emerge. Elusive images and old ghosts haunts its black waters, taking any divers in a twisted and dangerous dance. It was a blood-red light that pulled Judas away from his nightmares, and when his eyes finally opened, the sun was setting over the desert. His lips were dry and cracked, and he had sand in his mouth. Someone had set him against a twisted dead tree. There were shadows stretching over the sand in front of him. 11 shadows leading to 11 men. 11 men he knew very well. They were all there. Peter and John, James and Andrew, Philip and Thomas, Simon and Bartholomew, little James, Matthew and Thaddeus, his friends, his companions, his brothers. Judas felt his heart getting lighter and tears of joy watering his eyes. Now that they were finally together, he felt like everything could be solved. Brothers, Judas said, a whisper barely perceptible through his lips. Peter got closer. Judas, we've been looking for you all day. We were worried. They were alone, far from the city, far from their enemies. The only witness was a dead donkey covered in maggots, watching the scene through empty eyes. Flies were buzzing savagely all around. The sun was blinding Judas. I went to see Caiaphas. I wanted to ransom the master. Yes, we know, said Peter. Caiaphas warned us. He kept our 30 pieces and had me thrown in the desert. I'm sorry for the silver. I just wanted to... He felt so weak, he could barely think. And talking was exhausting. Don't worry, Judas. Peter knelt in front of him. That's not how this day will be remembered. He looked in Judas' disoriented eyes and smiled. Peter? Yes. Why did Caiaphas wound you? Because we have a deal with him, Peter said, carefully checking the wound on Judas' head. A deal? What deal? I don't understand. We've been in contact with Caiaphas for quite some time, and not just with him. But you shouldn't worry about that now. You did your part, and everything went as planned. The cause is ours now. The revolution starts today. What? Peter's chilling eyes shook Judas from head to toes, and his tears of joy turned into tears of dread. John was on the side, not in a noose. What are you talking about, Peter? What did you do? Where? Peter rested the finger over his mouth and lifted his chin, pointing him in the right direction. The sun was disappearing behind the Golgotha, shrouding in a crimson halo the 3 crosses on the top. It's our time now, Judas. We decide what is true and what is false, who is saved and who is damned. We decide what's good and what's evil because we are the voice of God, now and forever. Judas kept his eyes on the 3 crosses as the rope was tightening around his neck. And even if he was too far away to see their faces, he immediately recognized the man in the center. The end. And this was 11 Men, a story that comes half from Jesus Christ Superstar, I think, and half from growing up and spending my life in the country where the Pope lived, and the church isn't all that different than from back in the days. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll take it for what it is, just a story. And I guess I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.